IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's Wednesday. That means it is time for our Notre Dame Midweek Rundown. Before we dive into the topics for today, just a couple business things that we need to kind of get into today. Number one is, as I've said in the past, there are no mailbags on Wednesdays. So a couple things you can do. If you have a question that you want to ask, you can throw a super chat in there and we will answer those. If you are someone who wants to kind of dive into some questions, one thing I'm doing to kind of overcome not doing mailbags when I do solo shows, I'm going to be doing more solo shows in July, is I'm starting kind of a weekly Notre Dame football chat on the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com for all subscribers. And so you can ask questions. It's like 6 or 7 pages long. I'm only on page like 2 right now in answering questions, but it's just something I'll do kind of throughout the week, just to answer any questions that you might have about Notre Dame, about recruiting, about college football, whatever the case may be. So that'll help make up for the fact that we're not going to have quite as many mailbags during the summer as we've had in the past. Another thing, CFB Nation. On July 1st, CFB Nation will no longer be – the shows from CFB Nation will no longer be found on the Irish Breakdown feed. This has been planned from day one. It was never meant to be a permanent thing. July 1st, we're going to move them off. So that means the Lucky Lefty show. That means the CFB All-America show. And it also means all the shows that I'm going to be doing this summer. I'm going to start doing a college football season preview. I'm going to break down my top 25, go over our top 10 lists of certain positions, top quarterbacks, top offenses, top defenses, all those type of things. That's going to be a lot of fun. We'll make playoff predictions. We'll do all that kind of stuff on the CFB Nation channel. And we have a new show that's going to launch in July, something that we've been working on for about a year. As you all know, Brian Smith, who's been on our show at times throughout, really since we launched, has been doing a lot of different things. He is going to launch a show covering Southeastern recruiting. So obviously he'll talk a lot about Florida recruiting, but he's going to talk about Georgia recruiting, Louisiana recruiting, Mississippi, Alabama, all of that. It is going to be a national recruiting show. It's going to take on different forms throughout the year, obviously depending on what the topics are, but it's going to be focused on high school football recruiting. He's going to be doing some road shows this year where he's going to go to some of the top high school games in the Southeast. Right now, we're working on that schedule. I think he's going to be at one of Deuce Knights games, for example. I think he's going to be able to get up and catch Isaiah Canyon at one point in time as well. So he's going to be doing that, and he's going to have that show on the CFB Nation channel, on the YouTube channel, and the podcast channel. So if you want access to all those shows in podcast form, you have to subscribe to the CFB Nation channel. Now, I'm going to put a link in the chat below where you can go to either Apple or Spotify, whichever one that you're using, and you could subscribe to the CFB Nation channel. Do me a favor, hit that button right now, go subscribe to it. I promise you, you're going to love the stuff we're putting out. Just put a new show up today from the CFB All-America team. They talked about the difficulty of three-peating and how no team has three-peated since the AP poll in 1936. They talked about that's going to be the challenge for Georgia today, went through some recent years where they've had some of those, some opportunities over the years. Nebraska and different programs have had those opportunities. Alabama in 2013, and kind of what happened to those teams. And that's the task that Georgia has. And then they talked about since 2000, what are the best programs not to win a title? Not necessarily best teams in a year, but best programs. And they start things off talking about Notre Dame. So you're going to want to check that out as well. So definitely going to want to make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation channel. We're going to talk about this a lot. We definitely want to check that out. So we're going to do more recruiting on there. I'm going to have some college football stuff. We've got Lucky Lefty on there. We got the guys from Sporting News that do the CFB All-America show. Lots of good college football stuff on that CFB Nation channel. So you definitely want to check that out. Now, today's show, we're going to talk about a couple different topics today. We're going to dive into breakout players for Notre Dame this year, my predictions for breakout players for 2023. I'm going to talk 3 guys on offense, 3 guys on defense that I think are going to break out this year. A breakout is several different things. Breakout isn't always someone who's unknown that becomes known. Sometimes it's someone who's known that takes that big jump. So last year, Joe Walt had a breakout season. They say, how can he have a breakout season when he was a freshman All American and that type of thing? And then he's going to break out. Well, yeah, because he went from just a freshman All American, started maybe half the year, to one of the best tackles in football. It can be that type of jump. It can be a guy that maybe didn't play a ton that all of a sudden becomes an impact player or a really important player to the football team. It's meant to be somebody that makes a big leap. And so we're going to talk about that. There's three guys that I have on both sides of the ball that are going to be breakout players for me. Then we're going to dive into sleepers, and we're going to talk a little recruiting. And basically what it comes down to, it's kind of looking at sleepers, but it's really a breakdown and an explanation for you all of why I tend to be higher on this Notre Dame 2024 class than maybe some other people, and why I think this Notre Dame 2024 class needs to finish. Right? This isn't a preparing you for the class isn't going to be as good. They need to finish. We'll dive into that. Everybody knows if they don't finish strong, there's going to be criticisms to be had. But as it stands right now and looking forward, there are reasons why I'm very excited about where this football team is headed from a recruiting standpoint in a lot of different positions. And there's two guys above all on both sides of the ball that to me sort of define for why I'm excited about this class and what I think this class is capable of. So we'll break down each of those guys and why I think they are people that the Notre Dame fan base should be very excited about. Some will be easy for, I mean, Keidron Young's one. We'll get into some others. But there's some others that I'm gonna go out on a limb and put my reputation on the line about their breakout. So we'll dive into that a little bit as well. So let's begin with our breakout players, and this is one of the fun topics that I love to discuss every year. You see it every year, right? You see these players that come out of college football. It's not just Notre Dame. It's one of my fun topics to discuss for all teams, and you just get these guys that and some of them we know about, right? Like nobody was surprised that Bryce Young broke out in 2021, right? I mean, we anticipated that. He was an elite player, big time player coming out of modern day. We all expected that, right? And then there's guys that kind of come out of nowhere, guys that we are, saw play, but did you really see that coming? You think of obviously Mac Jones in recent years, Joe Burrow going from just an okay starter in 2018 to one of the all-time best seasons in 2019. And then there's other variations of it, right? You see guys that maybe we didn't know a lot about that became really important players, even if they weren't elite players, just very important players to a football team and just playing very key roles in what a team is going to do. And that's something important that every team needs. You need those guys that kind of break out, guys that maybe you weren't sure of, got to replace starters. Maybe you didn't get an opportunity to play. Some guys just get better. And when you think of Notre Dame over the years, we've seen guys like that, right? I mean, you look at the 2012 season for Notre Dame, Everett Golson steps up and really plays well that season. You saw other guys really take their games to another level. I thought TJ Jones had a really nice breakout season that year for Notre Dame on the offensive side of the ball. Bennett Jackson, I thought, had a really excellent season kind of coming out and becoming the top cornerback for Notre Dame that year. We saw Capron Lewis Moore really raise his level of play. Danny Spahn kind of broke out, and you see guys like that all the time. And those are the guys that we're gonna dive into today and have a little fun talking about today. And so for me, as I said at the beginning, breakout can mean a lot of different things. But the guys that I'm going to talk about today are guys that I do think are players capable of having really big breakouts. So I'm not going to do as many because of the nature of this team, as many of the, Jaden Thomas type breakout from last year. So I counted last year as a sort of a breakout season for Jaden Thomas. Went from no catches to a pretty good football player. Numbers weren't phenomenal. That's a certain breakout, but not like an explosion breakout. I'm going to really focus today on guys that I think are going to have really big breakout seasons for Notre Dame. And we're going to start on offense. So when you look at the offensive side of the ball, there's three guys, and I'm going to kind of go inside out on this one, sort of, I should say front to back, then out. My first one on offense is going to be Blake Fisher. Now, this is an interesting one for me because I'm probably the most cautious about this one. At times, I have really felt like, okay, this is going to be a kid that is going to be on this progression to be a really, really good football player. And so far, Blake has done that in a lot of ways. I mean, Blake came in as a freshman, earned a starting job as a true freshman, starts at left tackle, gets hurt in game one, comes back for the bowl game at right tackle, plays good football, and he was solid last year for a true sophomore. I guess when I look at Blake, part of the optimism comes from the fact that there's a lot of talent there, right? I mean, this is a big kid. He's got good athleticism for his size. He's got good natural power for his size. He's a worker. He's got a great attitude. He's a great team player. There's a lot to like about Blake Fisher. So then the concerns I have for Blake when you dive into his game is, number one, just the general, can he take that big step, right? Is he going to put in the work to become the technical player? Is he going to play with a little bit more, oomph that you want from him, where he kind of came off last year? You could tell he was still learning and thinking, and he would kind of come off and just body position and then drive. Is he going to come off and then just boom, just deliver force, just really drive guys off the ball? That's the step that I want to see from him. And then just consistency from week to week and then snap to snap. Those are all things he has to prove, and that's all part of a breakout season. But the other concern I have for Blake is I'm going to be very curious to see what his weight is going into the season. Obviously, Blake in high school was too big. And we've talked about this before. He just was a young kid, had a lot of baby fat. It was nothing unexpected, nothing to be concerned about. Just a typical young man that's really just grown up and developing his body. Then you get into situations where you come into college and the expectations are that you're going to, kind of take that jump as a player. And once you lose weight and you get down and all those type of things, and you get your body in the right position, and you're going to take that big jump. Well, sometimes guys can do that and they can lose too much weight. And we saw Blake in the spring, and it's not so much the 310 that bothered me. I mean, there's a lot of powerful, great 310-pound players. But, we talk about, you don't want to get too big. Well, sometimes they can get too light. And when I saw Blake this spring, it wasn't the 310 so much that bothered me as it was he just looked thin. He didn't look like he got down to 310 and he, big arm muscles and barrel chested and all that. He just looked like he had lost a little too much weight. What I was told at the time was they were trying to get some of that bad weight off of him and then put it back on. And that was the goal. That was the objective that they were trying to accomplish with Blake, was to come out and do that and get that weight back onto him in that regard. So, and that sounds great, but we need to see it. And that's a little bit of a concern that I have for this season is, can Blake Fisher can he go out and get that down to that 310 and then add on another 5 to 8, 10 pounds, get back up to 315 to 320, add a little bit more good mass in the upper body, and then take his game to that next level? That's a bit of a concern that I have for Blake. And that's one of the things that to me is probably the thing I'm most concerned about in regard to, will he break out this season? Is that. So those are the things that are right now a bit of the stumbling block between Blake from where he was as a sophomore in 2022 to where he can be as a junior in 2023. And you're starting to see there's some national love for Blake. You see people in the national magazines talking about Blake being a possible first-round draft pick, an all-American caliber player. And that's all great, and he certainly has that ability. There's no doubt about it that Blake Fisher has that ability. Can he take that step? But more practically for Notre Dame, a breakout from Blake Fisher is going to make this offensive line very good. Yes, you need inside guys to step up and play well and all those type of things. But where it really comes down to, and this is something that Lou Samoji had told me when I worked with him, is Joe Moore's philosophy on building an offensive line was always you figure out the tackles first. You go tackles, center, then guards. And I still believe that to be true. That's something that Coach Easton believed in as well. I don't know if it was ever voiced or expressed, at least not to me, but you could just follow the way he built his lines, and you could see it was very important to him that the tackle positions be solidified first. So then you kind of get into this season, and you've got Joe Alt, you've got Blake Fisher. If Blake makes that jump, then Notre Dame hands down has the best tackle tandem in college football. And I think that would be incredibly important and really big for Notre Dame when it comes to putting an offensive line together that can dominate in the run game, but also give Sam Hartman the time to be the player that we think that he can be. So that's something I'm looking for from Blake Fisher. And I think the other part of it is obviously we talk a lot about the pass game and protecting Sam Hartman and those different aspects of it. But it also comes down to I need to see Blake be more forceful in the run game. That's the part of his game more than anything else that I think he has the most potential at. I think he can be a tremendous run blocker. We have seen him be a solid run blocker most of the time with the typical sophomore technical things that can get you beat from time to time. And then at times a really good run blocker. We need to see Blake be that dominant guy more consistently. And it really comes down to him just playing, using his size, throwing his weight around, using his strength, and just playing with that oomph that I talked about earlier. We don't always see Blake do that. I think being more experienced is going to help him do that. And so my prediction is that Blake is going to get some of that strength back, get some of that weight back on, come out this year and be a really dominant player. And I think we're going to see it early. I think against Navy and Tennessee State, you're going to see him really come out right away and be a force in the run game. And by the end of the season, there's going to be this conversation of, I mean, who can challenge Notre Dame for the best tackle tandem in college football? And I think Blake Fisher's going to have a big say in making that happen. Next one for me is Audric Estimé. Now, some of you might say, okay, well, Audric Estimé, hold on a second. He had 920 yards last year, rushed for 11 touchdowns. What kind of breakout is he going to have? This one's a little bit different. I don't think Audric's going to have a monster jump in production. I think I predict sort of a 1,200 or 11 to 1,200 yard season minimum. Maybe he gets up to 13. I've got some questions about the work volume to get there. But when I look at Audric Estimé, it's more so about the perception. I really think he's going to have a breakout in perception. And then that's going to obviously help the reasons that breakout perception comes nationally is going to be a big thing that's going to help this Notre Dame offense. And I'll be honest with you, as I look through the preseason magazines and I read top 10 lists of running backs, I literally expected when I open those every time to see Audric Estimé in that top 5 to 8 running backs returning in college football. I really did. I just assumed that was going to be the case. Well, you know what happens when you assume. And I start reading these, and I don't know if there was a single one where Audric Estimé was ranked as a top 10 running back coming back in college football. And I got my Athlon right here. Let's see where Athlon had him. I know that they had him ranked at some point. I've seen stuff about the backfields have been ranked high, but not Audric Estimé ranked as high as you'd think he would. So when you go to the unit rankings, which are right here, there's love for the Notre Dame backfield. But when it comes to the position players, let me get to this here real quick, folks. It takes – actually, no, Athlon doesn't do it. It's Lindy's that does that. Excuse me. So Lindy's has their player rankings, and so does Phil Steele. We'll show those here in a second. But when I pulled up the Lindy's rankings and I go to running backs, I'm fully expecting to see Audric Estimé. And I go through the list and I say, okay, in the top 10, don't see him there. Okay, number 14, really? And I look at some of the guys ahead of him and I just kind of look at him like, boy, I don't understand that one. You know, like Frank Gore ahead of him. Like, okay, I don't quite understand that one. You know, some of the players ahead of him are good football players, but it's kind of like, why are they getting that love and he is not? And so I said, okay, well, we'll see something a little bit better in some of the other ones, and then you don't see it. You don't see those rankings make the jumps that you expect them to make, and you don't see all of it. It's so consistently just outside the top 10. Pro Football Focus comes out with theirs. Audric's not in the top 10. And you think, well, this is a 220-plus pound back who averaged 5.9 yards per carry, had 11 touchdowns, and in his first year in production. And he made some plays in the pass game. He was developed into a quality run blocker. And it just kind of makes me wonder, but what am I missing? Or what are they missing? And so I think that's going to change this year with Audric Estimé. I think he's going to come out this year. I think he's going to be over 1,000 yards. He's going to be over 10 touchdowns again, just like he was last year. I would predict he makes somewhere between 15 and 20 catches out of the backfield, you know, check downs and screens and things like that, where he can then go make some plays, just like we saw last year. And the tools are certainly there. I think what impresses me, somebody asked me for a comp, and I don't know if this was on the show or if this was on the message board, but somebody asked me for a comp to Audric Estimé, and I went with Ron Dane, and I went back and watched some Rondane film. I'm like, yep, that's where I'm at with him, because when you look at Rondane, you see this big guy that doesn't look fast, but he makes big runs. He's got great feet for a big guy, and I think Audrick's got a little bit more juice than Rondane does. Now he doesn't have the 30 extra pounds that Rondane had, and so obviously there are some differences in that regard. But I really like Audrick. I'm surprised that he hasn't gotten more national attention. And I think by the time the season's over with, I believe we're going to look at him as one of the 5 to 8 best running backs in college football. I think that's the breakout that I'm looking at. And he's going to be a name that a lot more people are talking about when we get to the end of the season. Now, here's the concern. And I'm going to do this with every player. What's keeping him from getting to that level? The fumbles aren't what concerns me. I think Audrick showed once he got out of that problem, it didn't rear its ugly head. So he got benched against UNLV, and we just didn't see him put the ball on the ground anymore the rest of the season. So I don't think that's going to be something I'm concerned about. Obviously, if it happens again, that's a problem. But I feel like he got through that problem after the UNLV game, came out against Syracuse, played great, and was just a different kid the rest of the year. I still have questions about his ability to be the workhorse. And I know some of you may be like, hold on a second. This is like a 225-pound kid that's very strong. I get that. But what I saw last year at times with Audrick is he seemed to wear down a little bit. Like I don't know if he's very high strung. I don't know if it's an issue with a medical issue, if you know the history of what happened to his mom and different things along those lines. And you just wonder, can he be a 40-plus snap per game guy? Because if Audrick is going to have the jump in production next year, he's going to have a jump in volume from the standpoint of snaps and the standpoint of being able to go out there and play from a more volume standpoint. If you look at last season, for example, Audrick went through the season and he never had, I'm looking at it now, he had a total of 434 snaps last year, right? So I'm going to go on offense and just pull up here real quick. He had 372 snaps last season. And his highest snap total came in the bowl game against South Carolina, and he had 40. And then other than that, early in the season, he was, 21, 31, 39, 38, 28, 22, 13, 35, 27, 27, 30, and 21. Now, if he's part of a 1-2 combination like he was last year, this won't be a problem. But even then, you're not going to have it won't, let me rephrase, it won't be a problem from the standpoint of the offense is still really good. Let's just say Jadarian Price, and you can pick another back, but I'm just going to go with Jadarian. Let's say Jadarian's ready to go in game 1, and he's ready to be like that number 2 back, that really good football player. And he's able to step up and carry a lot of the load that Notre Dame lost last year from Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree, because this is what a lot of people forget is we think of, you've got to replace 165 snaps by Logan Diggs, but you're going to need to replace at least half of the snaps from Chris Tyree or carries from Chris Tyree at 100 carries last year. Now, I say at least half because I think Chris Tyree is going to still get some carries. I think he's going to get some carries on jet sweeps and shovels and things along those lines. You'll probably throw more screens to him, which to me are extensions of the run game. So some of those things will get taken in those areas. And some of the carries will be taken from the pass game, RPOs and things along those lines. But when you look at it last year and you look at the sort of the production that Logan Audrick had from a snap standpoint, you got to ask yourself how much of what Logan Diggs did can Audrick take over? And now Logan didn't have a ton of snaps last year either. His most was 42 against UNLV. He was 11, 19, 22, 27, 23, 42, 26, 24, 22, 23, 27, 28. Then you look at Chris Tyree and where he was last year, and his snap production 24, 35, 35, 39, 29, 20, 22, 23, 19, 12, 19, 11, and 21. So you're talking about like 35 to 40 snaps per game that those other 2 backs had. How much of that is Audrick going to be able to take on? That's my question, without wearing down in games and then wearing down in November. And what's the balance from the Notre Dame coaching staff that you need to strike with Audric to say, okay, he was here. We need to raise that volume. He needs to be here, but we're not going to go past that mark, at least not in most games, because then you start to get that point of negative returns. What is the point of negative returns for Audric Estimé? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know that the Notre Dame coaching staff does. And so that is the one thing to me that could keep Audric from having the national breakout that I'm talking about. Now, is he going to still be very good? Yeah, he'll still be very good. But production like last year is great for the offense, especially if Jadarian Price and Jabron Payne and Devin Ford and Jeremiah Love can also see, a build on the production that we saw from Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree last year, two guys that combined for 1,260 yards last season. So Audric hopefully takes some of that, but then the other backs need to take some of that. And so those are the questions that I have for Audric. But if he breaks out, if my prediction for him being a breakout player is true, it does several things for the offense. Number one, it gives you that sort of that running back that in every situation, hey, we can give this guy the football and he can make yards. He's a very physical runner. He's got good vision. He's got good feet. He's hard to bring down. I was watching some of the Ohio State game the other day, and there were several times where Ohio State got penetration and kind of knocked linemen back into Audric, or they would hit him behind the line and he would just kind of keep going forward. And then you fast forward to the South Carolina game, and there was that play late in the game where they hit him like 2-3 yards in the backfield, and he just keeps bulling forward and ends up turning like a 3-4 yard gain. He brings a lot of that, and Audric is a very efficient runner. And Notre Dame's run game needs to be more efficient this year. You're talking about a guy that averaged 5.9 yards per carry last year, which is significantly better than anything Kyron Williams did. Kyron Williams the year before, as a 1,000-yard rusher, was 4.9 yards per carry. Kyron's best year was 5.3. Tony Jones was 5.95 in 2018. Dexter Williams was 6.3. Josh Adams was 6.9. Josh Adams in 17, he was 5.9 in 16. He was 7.2 in 15. CJ Prosise was at 6.6. Those are the numbers where you want to be. And then in previous years when Notre Dame's run game wasn't as good, it was 5.1 for the leading ball carrier, 4.6, 4.8, 5.1. You want to see Audric be in that 6+ yards per carry average this year. If he repeats 5.9 again, I'm good with that, as long as he can still remain that efficient back. But I think what you're going to see is with the improved pass game, Notre Dame's still going to run a lot of 11 and 12 or 12 and 13 personnel, but I think we're going to see even more 11 personnel this year, where it's going to spread the field and run more RPOs and create those opportunities for Audric Estimé. I have a part of my interview with Marcus Freeman talked about going out and expanding the pass game, and especially RPOs, and he explains why that's important, and I'll have that later today. But the whole time he's talking, Coach Freeman's talking to me about RPOs, and I'm just thinking, man, you getting guys out of the box against Audric Estimé. You starting to get those safeties peeking over top to help protect, to Tobias or Chris Tyree or Jaden Thomas or Deion Colsey or whoever. Boy, that's going to open up some big opportunities for Audric Estimé to really hammer people. You start getting a little fired up about it. So I think that's something that's going to help him as well. But it also gives you a guy that, if he breaks out, takes some of that pressure off the younger players. And I think that's very important as well. We don't need Jadarian Price to come out and replace all of Logan Diggs' production, or you don't need those backs to get to the 1,200 yards to replace that production from last year. Audric takes a chunk of that. Let's say he gets to 1,300 or so yards. Now, all of a sudden, those guys only need to get 800-900, yards next season. So those are aspects of it that I'm looking for as well. Breakout number 3. This one's an easy one. It's Tobias Meriwether. I mean, we've talked about him all of last season, all off season. He's a guy that I see as being a breakout. Now, what degree of the breakout? That's the question. Because if Tobias goes from 1 catch for 41 yards to 35 catches for 500 yards, that's a breakout. That's a huge jump in production. But does he just do that? Does he go 30 for 500, or does he go 50 for 700 or 800? Does he go 50 for 900? Does he go 60 for 1,000? What's that number that we're going to see from Tobias? I think that's the bigger question. I think we all expect Tobias to break out. The question is, what is the degree? Is it going to be a Jaden Thomas type breakout, or is he going to have the breakout that we've seen from past Notre Dame receivers? And I've talked about this, kind of chuckle when people say, well, yeah, you're just not going to see a guy go from 1 catch to a bunch. And I'm like, well, we have. We saw Golden Tate go from 6 catches and for 130 yards to 58 catches for 1,080 the next year with 10 plus touchdowns. We saw Will Fuller go from 60 for 161, 6 catches for 161 to was it like 76 catches for 1,094 yards the next year, 15 touchdowns. And then we saw Equanimeous St. Brown go from 1 catch in 2015 for 8 yards to, I think it was 59 catches for 960 something yards and 9 touchdowns in only 12 games the next year. So to me, the Equanimeous St. Brown number is the more realistic target for me for Tobias. Somewhere, around there. Maybe it's 850 or whatever. I think the ball is going to be spread around a lot this year. But if Tobias can be a 750 plus guy, that's the kind of breakout that's going to have a big impact for the Notre Dame offense this year. And if he can be that kind of player, it's going to help the run game. It's going to help the tight ends. Jaden Thomas is still going to get his, right? Chris Tyree's going to get his touches. But where's Jaden going to play? Is he going to be in the boundary where Deion's coming off the bench? Is Deion the guy in the boundary? And then Jaden is sort of the rotation player there, and he rotates everywhere. Does Jaden Greathouse play a ton? There's going to be a lot of questions about that. But the one thing we know is that field position, which Notre Dame calls the Z now. It used to be the X, now it's the Z. That we expect is going to be Tobias Meriwether. And that's one of the reasons that Lorenzo Styles transferred, because he just flat out got outplayed now and beat out by Tobias Meriwether. But can he take it into game days? That's the question. Some of the things I've heard about Tobias in practice and in one-on-ones, and it's just, man, he is hard to defend. But we've seen guys like that in the past that are great in those periods and great in practice, and then we get to Saturday and they just don't play with the same speed. With Tobias, I want to see a guy that plays with greater urgency. I saw him last year as a true freshman breaking down his film recently, again, telegraphing routes off the line. Not so much. So what does that mean for a receiver? It means I'm coming off slower. I'm not really ripping off. I'm not having the long strides, and I'm kind of telegraphing that, hey, I'm trying to stem you so I can do something, as opposed to just threaten every snap, looking like I'm just coming off the line and ripping you up and attacking you and trying to get over the top of you, then breaking off a route. That's, to me, something that was a big coaching point for me, and I learned this from studying Curtis Johnson when he was at Miami back in the day with those great receivers they had. Is if you're running a stop route, make it look like a go route. If you're running a post route, make it look like a go route. If you're running a comeback, an out, whatever, make it look like a go route coming off the line. Then when you eat up that cushion, then you can get into your leans or your top ends and all those other type of things. And so when I look at those aspects of it, you start to get fired up about, okay, if he can do that, he can be a really good football player for Notre Dame, and you start getting really excited about what he can do. So what are the concerns, right? The concerns are he's got to prove he can do it on Saturdays. That's number one. He's got to get stronger. That's the other part. And then he's got to be more consistent. Look, part of the reason freshmen don't play is because coaches don't want to take a chance of a guy making mistakes. And freshmen are going to make mistakes. And Tobias was no different than all other freshmen. Now, he should have played more. I don't buy that excuse. I think you figure out what he does well and you get him out there. So that's not to condone him not playing more last year. It's simply to say that that's a reality of being a freshman. Now that he's in year 2, he's got to come out and he's got to be a better football player. He's got to be a more productive football player. And that's what we're going to have to see from him this year. And if he can do that, this offense is going to be very good. If you can, because you again, that the tight end position is going to produce. That Jaden Thomas is going to get his. If you can then throw Tobias Meriwether in there as an impact type player, this offense is going to be a lot of fun. And I think he's going to be a favorite of Sam Hartman, and we're going to be loving what we're going to see from this offense in 2023. And Tobias is going to be a big part of that. So let's get into the Notre Dame defense and these breakouts. Now, this is the side, and we could have a lot of conversations about different types of breakouts. And Jason Onye is a name that I've seen people throw out there, and I think he'll have a breakout to a degree. But in this particular show, I'm focusing more on breakouts of guys who are going to be more regulars, production, and kind of stepping it up and really taking things to that next level. And I'm going to begin up front, and then kind of work back. And I know one of my breakouts you all are going to really hate. I know that. So I'm just going to do that one last just to have a little bit of fun with you. My first prediction breakout is Riley Mills. And I kind of feel like we've been here now for 2 seasons with Riley Mills. I thought last year he did some things that impressed me at times. At other times, he wasn't overly productive. Part of that was usage, how they used him. I think moving him inside to the 3 technique, which is a position that the staff wants to get more production from, is going to be better for him. He's really blown up. He's almost 300 pounds now. I've seen pictures of him from the spring that my wife took at games and practices, and you're like, this kid's gotten a lot bigger since last year. And then you watch him in practice, and you're like, he's still pretty athletic kid for that size. And so the production is there. We've seen flashes of that from Riley. When you look at what he's done so far in his career, his production has really matched, if not surpassed, things we've seen from other players that have had breakout seasons in their senior seasons. And it's not a new thing. We've seen this before as well, including from guys that played a ton of football early in their careers and came out and had production. So when you look, for example, at Jerry Tillery, and you look at his first 3 seasons in college, he had 14 and a half tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, and he played a lot more snaps than Riley Mills did. When you look at Sheldon Day, his first 3 seasons, he had 16 and a half tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks in his career. And you look at Riley Mills, he's had 11 tackles for loss, so not as much of the tackle for loss production, but he's already had 7 sacks. So coming into the season, reminder, through 3 years, Jerry Tillery had 5.5 sacks. Through 3 years, Sheldon Day had 3.5 sacks. Their tackle for loss numbers were higher than his, but if you go back and look at their snaps, they all played a lot more football than Riley did. Riley only played in 5 games as a freshman in 2020. He played in 9 games in 2021. And then, of course, he was a full-time guy last year. So his production on a per-snap basis through 3 years is significantly better than what we saw from Jerry Tillery and Sheldon Day in the past when you talk about just overall production, and especially in the pass game. And then, of course, as a senior, Sheldon Day went from 16 and a half tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks over 3 years to 15 and a half tackles for loss and 4 sacks just as a senior alone. Jerry Tillery went from a kid that had 14 and a half tackles for loss and 5.5 sacks to a guy that had 10 tackles for loss and 8 sacks as a senior. And I think Riley Mills has a chance to have a similar jump in production. I think he could be a guy that could be a 9 to 12 tackle for loss guy, hopefully double digits. A breakout for me means he's getting into double digits, 10 to 12 tackles for loss, and a guy that has a minimum 6 sacks this year and provides a lot of good pressure and disruptive plays. I think he's capable of it. We've seen flashes of it. Now it's just about doing it consistently. And that's the only concern you have for Riley is can he be anything more than a flash guy? That's the question. Can he be a guy that has that game like he had against Wisconsin in 2021 or Virginia in 2021? And he had some moments last year where you're like, boy, if he can do that for 30 snaps a game, this guy's going to be really good. And that's always the question with Riley. I think that hits this year. I think the production, or the snap jump he got last year, the move is going to help him from an experience standpoint. The move inside with some of the things that I believe that they're trying to do defensively, I think that's going to help his production. And then you're going to see behind him, we're going to see more Gabriel Rubio this year. We're going to see more Jason Onye this year. Other younger players are stepping up and pushing for playing time. And if you can take, 5 to 10 snaps off of his legs, maybe from what we've seen from the big ends getting past seasons, then I think that's something that's going to end up helping Riley in helping him stay fresh. And then you get into some of those bigger games, and now he can come out and play at a higher level. But if you look at him last year, and a lot of people don't realize this. I mean, Riley Mills was, according to Pro Football Focus, was 4th on the defense last year in pressures, despite having fewer pass rush plays than all the guys ahead of him. He actually had more hits on the quarterback last year, sacks plus hits, than Jason Adamiola did last season. And so those are things about Riley that you look at and you really like. And I think the thing for me is I expect him to make that jump in production in the pass game this year. My other big question with Riley is this: can he become a more disruptive run defender? And I think that's going to be where the biggest jump is going to come inside. I want to see him be more productive against the run. I think he's capable of it, but now he needs to show it. Breakout number 2. I think this is one most of y'all are going to agree with, and that's Xavier Watts. I think Xavier Watts is going to have a breakout season for Notre Dame this year. When you look at Xavier last year, we saw flashes of it. We saw him, as a guy that was moved back and forth. He ended up having to play a little bit of receiver at times last year in practice because they were so thin. The numbers were so bad. He played some receiver the year before. He was playing some nickel. He's moved around to safety. Late last season, second half of last season, it became okay, this kid is a safety. He started to get more and more snaps. And when he started to get more snaps, you saw the production really start to step up. And I thought he played very good football for Notre Dame down the stretch. I thought he was good against the run. I thought he was very rangy in the pass game. I think he's a kid that's capable of making a lot of plays in the football. And you started to see a really nice jump in production last season when he started to play. And especially down the stretch, he had three pass breakups in the last 2 games against USC and South Carolina. He's a kid that showed he can be productive in the run game. Had 10 tackles against Navy. And once the volume stepped up late in the year, he had a career high 44 snaps against Navy. It was a career high up at that point in time. Then he had 26 against BC, but then he played 52 in 62 snaps against USC and South Carolina. And he didn't look out of place. He looked very comfortable. And so to me, the light started to go on a little bit. Thought he had a good spring. I think he's a kid that's capable of being very good in coverage. I think he's a young man that has a chance to be a good run defender. He just has to – here's the big concern with Xavier. Can he be consistent from a technique and assignment standpoint? Even though he's a senior, he's not really a senior. He hasn't been a full-time safety for 4 years. He spent his freshman year playing receiver. He spent his sophomore season playing back and forth between both positions, receiver, DB. At times he's playing two-way. Last year a little bit, he even started the season off getting some reps at wide receiver early in the season as well. Only played 6 snaps against Ohio State, only 11 against Marshall, 16 against Cal, only played 9 against BYU. Didn't play a ton of football early in the year. That started to ramp up in the second half of last season. And I think now that we see Xavier head into season 3, I think he's now poised for that breakout season. And so what does a breakout for Xavier Watts look like? Well, honestly, it could be several things. A breakout for Xavier could simply be he becomes a good starter. I mean, I think that is something that I would consider a breakout season for him in the traditional, like the non-traditional sense. He had 39 tackles last year. I could see him being above 50, having 4 or 5 tackles for loss, a pick or 2, 4 or 5 breakups, and not have just a good season. That's a breakout season. I think he's going to be a little bit more than that. I think Xavier's going to be a kid that not only comes out and steps up to production. I think we're going to see him, be at least a 60 tackle guy. I think he could be closer. 50 tackle guy. I think he'd be a guy that's closer to 50 next season. I think we could certainly see that type of production from him. I think he's a guy because I think he's going to play a lot. I think he's a young man that has a chance to be very disruptive on the ball. And that's something we haven't seen a lot at the safety position in recent seasons outside of Kyle Hamilton, are guys that can make plays on the ball. We saw that last year. He's got a lot of range getting over the top. He can play man defense. He's got instincts on the football. That's something else that you really like is his receiver background. He's back-to-back 1,000-yard receiver and for his high school team. Helped them win a state championship as a senior. Played receiver at Notre Dame. Those traits have translated very well, it would seem, for Xavier. So I expect him to be someone who makes a lot of plays on the ball. And that's something that's needed for Notre Dame this year, big time, is they need a lot more production on the ball from their defensive backs. When you look at their production last year, one of the things, here's a stat for you. I want to talk about one of the reasons that Notre Dame's defense wasn't as good as it needed to be. Again, better than people thought, but not as good as it needed to be. Go look at where Notre Dame ranked in pass breakups last year, if you want to get sad for a second. Notre Dame ranked 129th. They were tied with South Florida. The only team that was worse than them was Charlotte. Only one team in college football had fewer pass breakups last season than did Notre Dame. That's a problem. And a big part of it was lack of production at the safety position. Going through the numbers here, they had 6 pass breakups all year from the safety position. Well, 3 of those were from Xavier Watts. That's a bad number. And then when you look at interceptions, it's not like that position group provided a lot of interceptions either. It only provided one interception. So for an entire season, your safety position only produced 6 or 7 passes defensed. That is a combination of breakups plus interceptions. That's an okay year for a starter, much less an entire group. That is a jump that needs to happen. And Xavier Watts is a guy that, to me, has a chance to be a big reason for why those numbers jump. Let's get into my third player, and this is going to drive y'all nuts. I'm going JD Bertrand as my breakout player for the 2023 season. And no, I'm not doing it just to get some of you fired up. I've kind of done a dive into JD's numbers. I've done a dive in his play last year. And when I broke down JD Bertrand last year, I think there were certainly technical issues he has to improve upon. He's got to do a better job of using his hands for block destruction. There's some technical aspects of his game that have to get better. But you could see last year that there was a lot of thinking going on with all the linebackers. And about middle of the season, you started to see JD start to think a little less and start to react more. And down the stretch, he was a pretty solid football player for Notre Dame. Obviously, didn't do much against Navy. I believe that was I think he was hurt that game. I can't remember why he didn't play. But then he comes out, has a good, very early game against BC, 5 solo tackles, only plays the first half, has 9 tackles against USC, 8 tackles against South Carolina. And then you start diving into the numbers a little bit. And I think some people forget this is a kid that's had 183 tackles the last 2 years, and a kid that's had 15 and a half tackles for loss the last 2 years, playing at Mike and Will. So then you look at his numbers and you compare it to the season before, when he had 101 tackles and he actually had 7 tackles for loss in 2021 playing Will. And then he had 8.5 this past season playing Mike. Well, here's the interesting thing about JD. When you study his numbers from one year to the next, JD played a lot fewer snaps last year. Missed the Navy game, and I can't remember why. I just remember him not actually. Did he? Yeah, he missed the Navy game. Don't remember why. Comes out only plays 16 snaps against Syracuse because he was, I believe, suspended for the first half of the game, if I remember correctly. He was suspended for the first half of the. Oh no, actually, that's not why. They didn't play a lot of that because so there was other reasons why, the way they were playing their defense. But he got suspended twice early, not suspended, ejected for targeting. So only plays 11 snaps against North Carolina, 25 against BYU, doesn't play against Navy, only plays 37 against BC because they blew him out. You look at the season, he had 580 snaps. Well, the year before, as a Will, he had 753 snaps. So if you take JD's production per snap last season and project that to next year, to the next year, 2022, to the snap. Let me start over because I jacked that whole thing up. If you take his production per snap in 2022 and you apply that to the same number of snaps that he had in 2021, he would have had 106 tackles last year, and he would have had 11 tackles for loss. That's a pretty good number. I think something else you also saw a lot from JD down the stretch, and a lot of people talk about missed tackles, and that's a very fair thing because JD had a lot of missed tackles in 2021. He had 19 missed tackles in 2021. That dropped to 10 last season, and a big part of that is because in the last 5 games he played, only had 2. And we started to see JD, and this is what I was talking about. We started to see him clicking more. And so how can a guy that had missed tackle problems be more effective, right? And so what was it on film that you saw from JD down the stretch that said, why didn't he miss as many tackles? A couple reasons why. Number one, we thought all along playing Mike was going to be better for JD because his lack of length, and length isn't height, it's length, it's true length, that can get you into some trouble at times when you're trying to tackle. If you're a shorter armed guy, stiff arms are more effective. It's harder to get your arms around a guy, especially bigger running backs and bigger quarterbacks. And so those things are going to factor into it. So he played fewer or had fewer missed tackles in that regard. His block destruction got better as the season went on. But here's the biggest reason why. Later in the year, JD was playing with greater speed because he was thinking less. When you watch him play against Clemson, for example, which I thought was a really good game for him last year, had 12 tackles against Clemson last year, 9 solos against them. Uh, he was excellent in that game. Well, why? Because he was so much more confident on where he was going. And so his reads were happening quicker. He was getting to the ball quicker. Those are all aspects of it um, that are you look at and say, okay, this is why the Notre Dame coaches really like this kid, because they see him as someone that when he is confident can get everybody else set up, but then he can go make plays in the football. And when you look at JD's production down the stretch last year, and you look at his last 5 games, and you say, okay, this is what they're talking about. So in the last 5 games for JD, I'm just going to do the numbers here real quick. He had 39 tackles in the last 5 games, which is good. If you span that over the course of an entire year, it's 101 tackles, which is pretty good. But here's the number that to me is the one that I look at. In the last 3 games that he played, he had 5 tackles for loss in the last 3 games. That's the number that matters more to me. It's the disruptive numbers. That puts him on a pace for 13 tackles for loss for an entire season. I think that is evidence of, go watch the games. Watch him play late in the season. Don't watch it with your thoughts of what he was before, what you're in your feelings about what you think he is. Watch the games down the stretch. Go watch the Clemson game. Go watch the South Carolina game. Go watch what he was able to do in those games and say, when he's on his game, that's what he's capable of. Now it's up to Al Golden to make sure that the defense is running away, that JD can always play like that, that Jack Kaiser can always play like that. Here's something else that's going to help JD this year is better play from the will position. So his breakout to me, in a lot of ways, comes down to, is the will position more steady? How does it get more steady? It's one of 3 things. A, Maris plays better. That's one way. 2, Maris loses reps to a player like Nolan Ziegler, who comes out and plays well, makes plays, and does what he needs to do, or Jalen Snead, or a couple of those younger guys that have a chance to push Maris at will, and the production gets better that way. Or 3, in a lot of these looks, you see Jack Kaiser there as well. If JD can have more faith in what's happening next to him, you're going to see him be a lot better player, because he can have faith in what's next to him. We saw this with Jalen Smith in 2015, where a lot of times Jalen had to protect Joe Schmidt. And so that limited his production a little bit. So I think those are aspects that I look at and say, that's why I see a breakout from JD Bertrand. I see a kid that's going to have as long as he's healthy and doesn't get ejected for a bunch of targeting plays, I see a kid that's going to have over 100 plus tackles for loss, and a guy that's going to be 100. That'd be a lot. That'd be great production. 100 tackles and then double-digit tackles for loss. That's not a stretch, because he would have done that last year if you simply did one of 2 things: took his last 5 games, projected that production over the course of the entire year, or just simply played more snaps at the production he had for the entire season. Which came from missing 1 game because of an injury, and then missing a little over a half of 2 other games because of the ejections. So those are the reasons why I think JD Bertrand is going to be another breakout player for me. There are other guys I thought about. I thought about Cam Hart for similar reasons to what I talked about with Audric Estimé. Good player that becomes more nationally known. You look at okay, give me a second. I'm putting people in timeout. Like, seriously, come on, guys. You look at other guys that could be breakouts. Cam Hart, I talked about. Cam Hart could be a guy that could be a breakout, and similar to Audric Estimé, where he was really good last year, but now he becomes a national name. I thought about having him. I thought about Jordan Botelho. Jordan Botelho could be a guy that I could see being a breakout player. He's another guy that I really thought a lot about. Can he come out and build on how he finished the season and take his game to another level and have a lot of production in the pass game? He's a guy that could be in that conversation. Benjamin Morrison, you could make an argument for. Yes, he was a freshman All-American last year, but if he jumps into All-American status this year, that's a breakout as well. I thought that one was a little bit too easy. That's honestly why I didn't go with Benjamin there. I'm going to have another show closer to the season of discussing who are the stars going to be for Notre Dame. And I'll talk about Benjamin there, but I just thought it'd be too easy and a little bit lazy to go with Benjamin for a breakout in 2023 for Notre Dame. I wanted to try to put a little bit more fun into this conversation. Offensively, some other guys we could talk about. We could talk about Zeke Correll. We could talk about Jaden Thomas. We could talk about Mitchell Evans. Some people talked about Jadarian Price, Billy Schrouth, I mean, in different ways. So there's a lot of potential breakout targets for Notre Dame this year. And the reason I enjoy this conversation is because the more of these guys that step up and play well, the better this team is going to be. And that's obvious. I mean, that doesn't take someone that does this for a living to observe that. It's we all know that, right? And that's going to be the fun part about it. But I think the three guys that I mentioned on both shows are not only the best bets for breakouts, but the guys who could end up being the most impactful if they are. So that's going to do it for section one of the podcast. Before we move along, folks, if you have not done so, do me a favor, hit that like button. Make sure that you're subscribed to this channel. And if you are not signed up for the message board, do so. We're doing this new weekly chat thing. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Some great questions so far. I hope the answers have been pretty good so far. I think they were pretty good. We shall see. So we've got a lot going on there. We're going to have some intel on the team coming out here in the next couple of weeks. You all know, I spend weeks gathering as much intel on the team as I possibly can. We'll have that coming out here in the next couple of weeks as well. So definitely going to do that. Sign up for the website, the premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can also support us by reading our stories every day, our free stories. And you can get those every day by signing up for the Irish Breakdown newsletter, which comes out every single day, just about every day now, not every day, but just about every day. And that has a link to all of our top stories from the day before. As I've explained before, there's obviously ways you can support us financially directly by giving us super chats. And even the best way is signing up for the message board. That's a great way. Buying merch from the merch store, which you'll find below as well. But by watching our shows, by watching our podcast, and by reading our free stories, you help us as well. And so we greatly appreciate that. So if you're not in a position to support us financially directly, or if you already have, you're already signed up for the board, there's other ways by reading our content and making sure that every single day you're going to irishbreakdown.com and checking out all the new content we have. Ryan has an interesting story out today already about a top 100 receiver from Texas named Dalen McCutcheon, who told Ryan that his top two schools are Notre Dame and Oklahoma. There's also an outstanding defensive back in the 25 class from Mater Dei out in California, Chuck McDonald, who likes Notre Dame a lot. And so he's talked about the relationship he's building with Chris O'Leary and the Notre Dame coaching staff. That's out there too. And then later today, I'm going to have I'm going to have a story on coach, some more from my one-on-one with Marcus Freeman. So I'll have that out there as well. So definitely make sure you check that at irishbreakdown.com. So let's move on to our second topic for today. And the second topic for today, actually, it's really the third because we have the two breakout sections. And this comes down to a conversation about the Notre Dame 2024 class. And look, there's a lot that needs to happen for this class to reach its full potential. You need obviously to win some battles down the stretch. There's still Justin Scott on the board. There's still Kingston Viliama Asa on the board. Carter Nelson obviously picked Nebraska. We knew he was off the board. Bradley Shaw's on the board. Caleb Beasley. There's still guys on the board that you need to close on. But there are guys in the class now, and when people look at the class, I think we kind of went off a little bit last week, or it was earlier this week, and the conversation was, I don't understand why some people are more down on the class. Because in my head, I don't look at the class based on what the recruiting rankings are. I look at it in my head of what I think it is based on my film evaluations. And I hear people talking. I got into a conversation in a private message on the board with somebody who I like a lot. He's a really good guy, but he tends to be a little bit on the negative side. And then he made a comment where I said, it kind of hit me what the problem is. And the problem is that I don't think a lot of Notre Dame fans really appreciate the talent of a few kids in the class that I think are very big time players. And what I realized is if some of you that aren't as high on this class thought about these players like I do, I think you'd look at this class very differently. So whether you call them sleepers or whatever you want to call them, they're guys that to me are guys that I think are what define this class right now, and are why I tend to be a lot higher on this class than other people are. And now this class can't reach its full potential without adding kids that aren't in the class right now. If you don't get Kingston, if you don't get Gary Lambert, if you don't get Justin Scott, if you don't get a Bradley Shaw or I mean, if you don't get those guys down the stretch, then no, this class won't be as good as it needs to be. But where it is right now is really good, and there's a few players that are being way overlooked by a lot of Notre Dame fans, and I'm going to break down 4 of them today. And I'm going to talk about 2 on offense and 2 on defense. The first one I'm going to talk about on offense is Kedron Young, the running back from Lufkin, Texas. I was talking with a buddy of mine, and it's kind of funny. Notre Dame fans are rightfully very hard on 3 because their rankings are really bad. But there's couple players that I'm going to discuss here that they get right way more than anybody else, and one of them is Kedron Young. They rank him as the number 82 player in the country and the number 8 running back in the class. I still think 8th running back in the class is a little low. There are some running backs that I've seen ranked 1 and 2. Go watch Taylor Tatum and tell me that you think he's a better running back than Kedron Young. I don't think that he is. Now, he's ranked higher by everybody over him. There's several backs like that where I'm like, I'm not trading that guy. I'm not trading Kedron Young for that guy. Not just because he's committed, because that guy's not as good of a player. And so when I look at that, I say, man, this kid is a really good football player. Well, where does everybody else have him ranked? And this is where I think it comes down to why people aren't as high on him. Rivals has him ranked number 213 player in the country and the number 16 running back. And then 247 Sports and ESPN don't even have him in their top 250 and 247's top 247, right? He's ranked number 182 on the On3 consensus and number 207 on the 247 Sports composite. And that's fine. It's a good back, but that doesn't make you think difference maker. And when I look at the combination of Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams, I think it's elite. I really do. And a big part of that is because Aeneas is a really good all-around back. I think Aeneas is a significantly better prospect than Kyler. I was going to say Kyler Williams. I don't have a clue what's going on with me today, why I can't get names right. Kyron Williams. I think he's a much better prospect at the same age than Kyron Williams. I think he can do even more in the pass game than Kyron can do. I think when you look at what Kedron brings to the table, size, great balance, speed, big-time production in a big-time area, I think those are areas where I see a really talented back and a big-time back and a top 100 back. I think that number 82 ranking from On3 is about where I'd have them. It's in that range. I'd say like 70 to 90 is probably where I would have him. I think he's a really, really good football player. And I think if Notre Dame fans all viewed him the way that I do, then I think there'd be a lot more excitement about him. But it's not just him. There's another player on the board that I think is very underrated, and you could call him a sleeper or whatever the case may be. I just think he's a difference maker, and that's Isaiah Canyon. Actually, you know what? Let's watch a little bit of film before we move to Isaiah Canyon. What I did want to do is I did want to watch a little bit of film here about some of these guys. So as I'm talking about them, you'll get a chance to see what I'm talking about and why I'm so high on these guys. And this is a little bit of film from Kedron Young, and you're going to get a chance to see what I'm talking about. We won't watch a ton of it, so I'll play the other ones as I'm spending more time talking about them, so you get to see a little bit more of their film. But I didn't want to cheat Kedron, and actually, you know what? I don't want to cheat Kedron. I don't want to cheat y'all from getting a chance to watch this young man play. This is a really, really good football player. But what you see is a guy that's powerful. He's listed at 5'10". Some people have him at 210. Some people have him at 220. Looks at least to be 210, 215 for me. He's going to easily be 215, 20-pound back when he gets to college. And you see a guy that's got big time production and a guy that's got some speed for a player with his size. So when I look at Kedron, he's got everything you want. He's got a great low built frame, thick legs, great feet, really good balance, really good vision, good second level anticipation, can make plays in the pass game. His anticipation skills, as you see on that clip right there, are just outstanding. This is Ryan and I broke this down. This is a really good run. To see this happen so quickly, put your foot in the ground and get vertical, and this burst of that line, those are all things that you really get fired up about when you watch Kedron Young play, and are parts of the game that make me very excited for what he brings to the table. We'll have more of these other guys when I get to them, but I think Kedron Young's a big player. Who's my next guy on the list? I think some of you already know who this is going to be. My next guy is going to be Isaiah Canyon from Warner Robinson High School in Georgia. I remember when I first was told about Isaiah Canyon. I had someone that knew Notre Dame was recruiting him, and they said, "You got to check this kid out. They're going to go after this kid." And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, "No, there's no way there's no way they're going after this kid. There's no way. This kid's ranked really low." Because look, we all have that reaction, right? He's ranked really low. I wasn't blown away with his offer list. You just kind of get those immediate judgment reactions. Now, what I try to do is not allow those immediate reactions to define what I see in film. I try to let what I see on film define what I think about a kid. But I'm not going to lie. When I first heard of Isaiah Canyon, and then you think about who Notre Dame had on the board at the time and who we thought they had a pretty good shot at. Ryan and I were feeling very good about, Jason Robinson and their chances to land Jason Robinson. Jeremiah McClellan was a guy that was still very high on Notre Dame at the time. You looked at some of they were recruiting Quasi Gilmer really hard. They were still on TJ Moore, Bredell Richardson, a guy that I like a lot. They were all on all those guys. And they were even recruiting Ryan Wingo still at the time, Josiah Brown, who just committed to Penn State. All those kids were still on the board. And you hear about this kid from Georgia, and you're like, I've never even heard of this kid. He didn't even play receiver, is what you're told. And then you start to watch the film, and you're like, okay, I get it. I get what they're liking. And I've fallen in love with this kid. And from the first time you see him playing receiver, you see him playing quarterback, you see him playing defensive back. He can do it all. Great frame, size, speed. Went to, I think, the Georgia camp this summer and measured in at 6'3.5" and 198 pounds. Also ran, what was it, like a 4.48 or 4.51 official laser time, which is a 4.4 if you're doing handheld, which is really, really fast time. And he's just a smart football player, really athletic player, brings a ton to the table. Absolutely love Isaiah Canyon. So then I break down the film. We've talked about it, been in love with this kid from the minute I saw his film, graded him out, grades out as a top 100 player to me. And honestly, he's on the same page as the guys that we liked last year with Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse from a grade. When you look at the tools, now he doesn't have their production, especially Jaden Greathouse's, but he's over 6'3". He's about 200 pounds. He's faster than Jaden was at the same age. And, the production will come. But there's a lot to like about Isaiah Canyon. And then you look at his recruiting profile, and you see On3 has him correct at number 94 overall. ESPN has him number 240. But 247 and Rivals have him as a 3-star. And Rivals has him ranked so low, which is just really nutty to me, that they don't even have him among the national rankings at wide receiver. Now, maybe they don't. They have him as a 5.63 star, which means he's not even on Rivals in the top level of 3 stars. He's in the middle level of 3 stars. My whole thing is, I don't know how you can watch this kid play and think that he's anything other than a 4-star player. Now, it's debatable if you want to say, hey, he's not a top 100 player, because here's why I can make the case. If you were forcing me to take the devil's advocate opinion on why he shouldn't be a top 100 player, I'd say it comes down to he's still pretty raw at the position. We haven't seen him play it for a full year. Yeah, he's done some things there, but he's also playing quarterback and he's playing DB and he's doing a lot of those other things. And he doesn't have the production of some of the other top receivers in the class. Very fair. Very fair. Now, I don't care about that. And the way that I rank is just, what is your ability? And production is a part of it. But my whole thing is if his production was there, then he'd be a top 50 guy for me. That's how good he is, because he's got a 5-star upside grade. And as much as I love CJ Carr and Cam Williams, I actually gave Isaiah Canyon the highest upside grade of anybody in the class. Now, it's not by much. Cam Williams is right there behind him, and CJ Carr is right behind Cam in those areas. But I just a God-given tools and potential and all, and the upside. The 1-2 punch of Isaiah Canyon and Cam Williams, to me, as a 1-2 punch, is as good from just a pure potential standpoint as Notre Dame has had in a very long time. A very long time. I think you'd have to go back, to me, to the 2016 class to find a group that, to me, had that kind of upside. And the upside of that group was you had Chase Claypool and you had Javon McKinley were the two in that class. And this, to me, this group might even be better than that. I think it is. And then if you throw in, obviously, Kevin Stefferson had a lot of upside in that class too. But this duo has as much upside as any of them. And those are the things you get excited about. And Notre Dame needs guys like this because he brings a little bit more. Braylon James is 6'2", 6'2.5". This kid's about an inch taller, and he's already 10, 15 pounds heavier than Braylon. So he brings a little bit of a different type of body to the table. They don't have a lot of. Jaden Greathouse is 6'1.5", 210. Rico's 6 feet tall. So I think he brings a unique skill set to the table that excites me about the kind of player he can be. So when you look at this class, and we all agree that CJ Carr and Cam Williams are big time players, right? Top 100 players. Then after that, you say, well, what else is there to be excited about? Well, for me, you want to understand, I'm trying to give you guys a glimpse into my head and why I feel the way that I feel about this class. That's 4 top 100 players on my grading system. So obviously CJ Carr, you've got Cam Williams, you've got Keidron Young, and you've got Isaiah Canyon, all as top 100 players on my board. There aren't a lot of teams right now that have 4 top 100 skill players in their class on offense. There aren't a lot. And Notre Dame has that. And then, of course, you add in, Kyron Williams, Aeneas Williams, who's a top 200 caliber player. You throw in Micah Gilbert, who's a top 150 to 200 caliber player. Then you've got Styles Prescott, who's got a lot of tools. Peter Jones, Jack Larson's a top 250 caliber player for me. Now you guys start to understand why I'm so high on this offensive class and why I get so fired up about this offensive class. And so these kids are a big part of what I see there. And Isaiah Canyon, to me, and the potential that he has is partly why I'm so fired up about this class. It's not just on offense. Somebody just said the problem is they're all on offense. Well, the problem is because I'm starting the show talking about one side of the ball. Be patient, my man. Let me get to the next side of the ball. And I think this is the one to me where the defensive side of the ball is not as good as it needs to be. It's not. I'm not going to sit here and try to tell y'all, no. Look, if they don't get Kingston Viliama-Asa and if they don't get Justin Scott, they're fine. No problem at all. Just go get so-and-so and you're good because they've got this guy and that guy. I'm not going to sit here and do that because A, I don't believe it. And B, I've always told you I'm going to be honest with you. And if that means being critical of Notre Dame, I'm going to be critical of Notre Dame. They can't get shut out with Kingston and Justin Scott. They can't get shut out. If I had to predict right now, I think the odds of them getting shut out are better than getting both right now. That's just the reality of it. Still a lot of time to be had. Those guys are important. But look at what they have now. That's what I'm focused on. Needs to get better. Offensive class, you're Gearby Lambert, and you're good to go and call it a day, and you've got a phenomenal class. Defense needs a lot more work. There's a few players, however, that I am very fired up about. We've talked a lot about Bronte Johnson. I love the upside of Teddy Rizak and Bodie Cahoon, but they have a long way to go. They're not guys that I think are impact players right now. They're guys that have the chance to be impact players down the road, the 2 linebackers. Logan Thomas is a very similar kid. Bryce Young is a very similar kid where I love the ceilings, tons of upside. But they're kind of boomer busty type of guys, right? And you don't want to have a class built around those boomer busty type of guys. You want a class that has guys that can come in and be difference makers and ideally difference makers earlier on. And there's 2 guys on my board that I think a lot of fans underappreciate. And of course they're being underappreciated by the national rankings that explain why even with the needs to do better, the needs to finish strong, why I very much like this defensive class and believe this defensive class could be really good if they're able to finish with those 2 players that we talked about, or even if you can just get Justin Scott and Bradley Shaw. Still fired up about that, but you need to be able to get some of those guys to really build on this class. The first guy to me, and this I'm just going to go out and say it. First guy to me is Cole Mullins. And you all know how I feel about Cole Mullins. I think Cole Mullins is a big time football player. When I watch this kid play, plays at Mill Creek in Georgia, I just don't get it. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day whose opinion I trust very much, and we were talking about Cole Mullins, and I said, "Hey, listen, be straight with me," because I had the same exact conversation with this person 2 years ago with Benjamin Morrison. We had a chance to sit down and talk over the summer, and I asked this guy, I said, "Look, am I nuts? I think Benjamin Morrison's going to be a star," and his face just lights up, and he's like, "Oh man, I love that kid. He's so good," all that kind of stuff. And so then I was talking with this guy recently, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it again. Am I nuts? Am I nuts for thinking Cole Mullins is a dude?" Same reaction, just lights up. Oh my gosh, this kid's so good. Cole Mullins is a kid that I just don't understand his ranking. Sometimes, as I said with Isaiah Canyon, I understand why some people don't think he's a top 100 player. Now, 3-star, that's silly. But I can get it to a degree why you might not even have him in your top 250. Don't agree with it, but I understand it. He's a top 100 guy for me, but I understand it. With Cole Mullins, I don't understand it. I really don't get it. I see a kid that's got great size. He measured in at Notre Dame just under 6'4", 240 pounds. He's long. He's powerful. He's athletic. I mean, you watch this kid play, and then he's playing against big time football in the state of Georgia. I don't get it. He played with Caleb Downs last year, so it's not like schools aren't looking at him and watching his film. I actually had him as a top 150 player when I initially broke his film down. And you look at like that play right there. That is a big boy play right there. And I found actually some game film of Cole that I was able to watch recently, and it allowed me to kind of regrade him now that I got a chance to see even more game film. And he actually jumped in the top 100. So he's now a top 100 graded kid for me in the class. So the defense does now have a couple of those guys like that. I think this kid's a difference maker. I don't understand why he's not getting more love. I see a kid that's powerful. I see a kid that knows how to play football. I mean, he's a 6'4"-ish, 240-pound kid playing middle linebacker half the time for a really good Georgia high school. You see that play right there. That's him playing middle linebacker. Again, I just don't understand what the lack of play there. And I've heard people say, like somebody in the chat, he hasn't been offered by the big schools in the SEC. USC didn't want Benjamin Morrison, folks. Texas didn't want Benjamin Morrison. Those are big time schools that recruit the state of Arizona a ton. The offers aren't the end all be all, but it does make me ask the same question that you just asked. He's not even getting those offers. I don't understand it. I really don't. And I've tried to look at his film. I've watched his film probably more than anybody in this class, because I wanted to say, okay, am I overhyping something? Like, look at that range right there. That's a defensive end, folks. Am I overhyping something? Am I getting caught up in my own biases of what I like in certain players? What is it that I'm not seeing? Look at that range right there. Again, they're projecting him to be either a viper or a big end, and he's doing that as a linebacker. You start to ask yourself, so I try to watch the film and I try to be critical and, okay, let me look for this and let me look for that, and I can't find it. I really can't find it. And every person that I talk to who I trust, including some people that have never seen the kid play, and I say, okay, here's the highlights, check these out. And they're like, man, I'd love to see him game film, but good Lord, that kid's really good. I think this kid's an impact player. So when some of you all look at the defensive class, you see Bronte Johnson and then a bunch of not very highly ranked players. And I understand that. When I look at this defensive class, I see Bronte Johnson, who's a highly ranked player, which is a big pickup. But I also see this kid right here, and I view him as a top 100 player with a big upside. And so to me, that's what I see. And again, I could be wrong, but I've yet to have anybody give me a reason why he's not ranked higher. No one's been able to give me a reason why he's not getting more love from the bigger schools. No one's been able to explain it to me at all. And that's the thing that's a little bit frustrating. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of glad, right? And I know sometimes as fans, we say, hey, look, we want to get that Southern kid with all those offers. But guess what? A lot of times when those Southern kids have all those offers, they don't end up at Notre Dame. So in some regard, I'm kind of excited. Look at that bit dip and that getting around the edge. That's really impressive. But I'm kind of encouraged by it because it allowed Notre Dame to get into the mix and really get this kid in the class, because to me, he is a big time player. So you want to talk about why I'm higher on this defensive line class and why I've not crushed Al Washington as much as I had in the past. It's because he went out and played a big role in getting Logan Thomas, and it's because he played a big role in getting Cole Mullins as well. Now, Al Golden actually this is one of the few recruitments where Al Golden's name got mentioned, but he also did a good job, as did Max Bulla, surprisingly, is a name that we heard mentioned with Cole Mullins as well. But this is a kid that I'm very, very fired up about. There's another young man in the defensive class that again, if you viewed him like I view him, then your entire opinion of this class changes. Now, again, doesn't change the importance of Justin Scott, Kingston Viliama Asa, and those guys. Doesn't change it at all. But it changes how you evaluate what's there now. And when I look at it and what I see now is I see guys with big time potential. So as I said, I see Bronte Johnson as a top 100 caliber-ish player. I see Cole Mullins there. I see Logan Thomas as a top 150 guy. I see obviously the ceiling guys that aren't top 150, but the ceiling guys a linebacker. But here's another kid, and that's Leonard Moore. And you all remember from the minute we saw Leonard Moore, this is a guy that we were very high on, and I especially am very high on in the 2024 class. And I see a kid that's got great length. He measured in at over about 6'1" and a half, 6'2". I was told he's legit 6'2". Walked by him at Notre Dame's he was at a practice in the spring. He's significantly taller than I am. Whether that's an inch and a half or 2 inches, I don't know. I just know he's tall. But even beyond the height, he's got very long arms. He's a very smooth athlete. He's smart. He's been challenged. He plays in a good region. And when I graded him out, he's a top 150 player on my grading scale. That's this close away from being a top 100 guy. And there's just some technical things and some tackling things and things like that I just want to see from him as a senior. But when I look at the length and the speed and the athleticism and the instincts that he has, he's a heck of a football player. And if he can make the kind of jump that we normally see, like Benjamin Morrison was a guy that I loved as a junior, you all know that, but got even better as a senior. And I'm hoping that Leonard Moore can make a similar jump, because this is an outstanding football player to me. This is a borderline top 100 kid. Now, Rivals is the one that actually has him somewhat correct. They're a little lower on him than I am, but they're close. I think he's ranked 196 now. They did have him at number 153. I think 153 would probably still be a little low for me. He's probably more in that 110 to 125 range for me, but he's a top 150 kid and has all the talent in the world, a guy that I'm excited about. And he's just one of those gems. We've seen Mike Mickens do this, right? He goes out there and get these kids that not a lot of people have heard about, and then he gets on them early before everybody else finds out about the kid, and then they get them. I think when you look at the change of direction for such a long kid, you see the tools I'm talking about. So you want to know why I'm a little higher in the defensive class? Not what they need to do. That's a given. I'm talking about the defensive class that's already on board. It's these two kids are a big part of it, because I don't view them as having just Bronte Johnson and a bunch of guys with high upside. I think they have Bronte Johnson. I think they have Cole Mullins. I think that they have Leonard Moore as all top 100 caliber football players. Two of them, I believe, already are. I got to go look at Bronte's. I think he's a top 100 guy for me, but he might have been just off of the grading scale of top 100. Let me go find Bronte's thing real quick, because I know Bronte's number 2 in the rank. Oh yeah, he's the top 100. So Bronte is the number 2 player in the class for me. In my rankings for the Notre Dame class, he is right behind Cole Mullins. Cole Mullins is still my number 1 ranked player in the defensive class for me. But when I see him, when I see Bronte as my number 2, when I see Leonard Moore as my number 3, those are 3 really good football players. And then you go throw Logan Thomas in there as a guy with a ton of talent. Now, part of the issue that I have with the defensive class is there's a lot of upside guys. I mean, Bryce Young is a lower now, but a higher, he has a ceiling, but he's got a lot to learn. You look at Teddy Rizak, same thing. Love the athleticism, love the instincts, love the production. All those things are really impressive. But look, the reality is he's really raw, and the production right now doesn't match the talent right now. So that's something he's going to have to get better at. Bodie Cahoon, very talented player, 6'3", 220, tons of athleticism, tons of potential, but he's still very raw. And there's a lot of that in this class. Kennedy Urlacher is a very similar situation. Love the kid's athleticism, love his talent, but he's still a really raw football player that has a lot to learn. And there's a lot of that in the 24 class on defense, which is certainly something to be concerned about. You don't want to have a class filled with the high upside guys and the lower floor guys, and that's where they are on defense. But my contention is that there's a lot more high floor guys than people think, and it really comes down to these 2 kids, and it comes down to Cole Mullins, and it comes down to Leonard Moore, who I am very high on. If you look at the signings for the last couple years, now Christian Gray, Benjamin Morrison's the only kid that is a junior graded out higher for me than Leonard Moore. Christian Gray's senior year and Micah Bell's senior year grades were slightly ahead of where Leonard Moore is now as a junior. And most kids make jumps and their grades get higher as seniors. And I expect Leonard Moore to do the same exact thing. But if you look at junior grades, the only player in the last several years that had a higher grade coming out of high school at corner for me was Benjamin Morrison, who obviously went on to become a freshman All-American at Notre Dame. And so that's what I like about it, and that's where I'm at. And that's you want to know why I'm higher on this class? It's because I look at the film and that's what I see. I see what we see from these kids. And at the end of the day, I can ask myself all the same questions you all are asking. I really can. But when I look at it, I see the film is always going to trump for me. And if I'm going to miss, I'm going to miss because of film, not because of some of those other things. So that's where I'm at. So that's my feelings on the 2024 class. I had one super chat here quickly from Anthony Solomon. Anthony, thank you. Said, thanks for the show today. You are welcome. So, folks, that's going to do it for today's show. We will have a show tonight on the IB Nation Sports Talk show at 6 o'clock. Don't leave right now, okay? Do me a favor. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. I'm going to put the link to the shows, the CFB Nation shows, in the chat again here. If you have not done so, do me a favor. Go subscribe to CFB Nation channel. Starting July 1st, that's the only place you're going to find the Lucky Lefty podcast. It's the only place you're going to find CFB Nation because they're no longer going to be on the Irish Breakdown feed. I'm going to launch my summer breakdowns for Archer and all you non-Notre Dame fans that are on our channel. The CFB Nation channel is where I'm going to have a lot of my college football analysis. So I'll break down Ohio State at some point in time. Not looking at it from a how they stack up against Notre Dame standpoint, but just a college football analysis ranking. Here's what it is. This is where we're at. So I'm going to have that as well. So definitely go in there and check those aspects out. You're going to love that stuff. I promise you're going to like the stuff that we're going to do on that. So definitely subscribe to that channel on the YouTube platform, on the podcast platform. Definitely check those shows out and prepare yourself because we're going to have a lot of stuff coming out in July. And then we'll continue it to a degree into the season as well. Going to look to add more hosts. Brian Smith is going to join us for his Southeastern recruiting show. He's going to have minimum 2 to 3 shows a week. First couple weeks is going to be close to a show a day as he previews the 2025 class. You're definitely going to check that out. And again, when we do this, it's taking the Notre Dame hat off, which I try to always do. Take the Notre Dame hat off in regard to talking about these things and how they relate to Notre Dame. And I'm breaking down Bama for the sake of Bama. I'm breaking down Ohio State for the sake of Ohio State. We're breaking down recruiting just from a national standpoint, not a how it relates, what it means for Notre Dame and who's Notre Dame got to compete against, any of that stuff. It's just going to be college football. And so it's going to be fun. And I think you guys are going to enjoy it. And of course, you can always talk with us about all those topics if you sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You do not have to be a Notre Dame fan to sign up for the message boards. Just understand we're talking Notre Dame football, but we can talk college football as well. As long as you're respectful, people will treat you respectfully, and I'll make sure that they treat you respectfully. So come on over and join us. So that's going to do it today, folks. Hit that like button on your way out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. But more importantly, have a great, safe rest of your day, and we'll see you again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast.